show you how I made this Howl's moving castle cape. This is a character I wanted to dress up as for a while now, because Howl's Moving Castle is not only one of my favorite movies, but also one of my favorite books. And Howl is such a funny character, so I decided to make this cape inspired by the Studio Ghibli film adaptation of the story. So I wanted to show you how I did it. It's very easy. I followed a pattern. Followed Simplicity 8263. And I used View D right here. And I also took some elements from View B, mainly the armholes on the cape here. It wasn't really necessary, but I wanted more of the ease of wear, having these sort of holes here, so I could stick my arms out and be able to do things a little bit more easily. So I took that from View A or B. They both have these holes, so yeah. And here's all my pattern. I think I did size small. Yes, I did size small, and I do feel like the cape turned out a little bit larger than I was wanting, but at the same time, Howl's coat is definitely very oversized, so I think it kind of works. So I considered putting a full sleeve in this side seam here, but I decided against it. But that's definitely an option. You can make a pretend sleeve and just sew it in so that you do have the sleeve detail going down. Mine is more of a based on type of thing though, so not entirely accurate. So for the main fabric, I picked out this Melanie Kona cotton fabric. I felt like this suited it a little bit better. Not so bubblegum pink, but more of a orangey pink. I like this better. So I picked out this color. For the lining, I picked out this red, just the standard red in cotton. Same type, the Kona cotton, just a different color. I don't have a lot of this left, so for these diamonds, as well as the back, I wanted something sparkly, something with a little bit of magic to it, so I picked out this Kaufman shimmer fabric. I forgot the name, but it's got some metallic threads in it. Let me see if I can show you a little bit better. Just a moment. I see myself. See if you can. to see it a little bit. Anyway, it's got these metallics in it, which add a little bit of sparkle. And then for the golden outlines, or yellow, I wanted something gold. Normally they're yellow, but I wanted gold. I felt like it would look nicer. I went with this Cloud 9 Glimmer Gold fabric, which is just gorgeous. And it has those same lurex strands in it. Let's see if you can... Hopefully you can see that. Like a little bit farther away. There we go. That's a bit better. It's got this gorgeous little flecks of gold in there. And all of it cotton, so it was very easy to work with. And besides that, standard thread and stuff, I also used a invisible top stitching thread to put on the diamonds. This fabric ended up being a little bit fray-y, so I did back it with some interfacing, but I'm going to show you basically everything that I did, and let's get started with that. So here I'm just laying out my two front pieces. I used view A and B as a guide to determine the correct placement for the armholes, and I used part of D's front to determine the size that everything needed to be of the front pieces, and I cut them out. And also needed the collar in the same pink fabric. And that was cut on the fold. I really like this fabric. It was a little bit more loosely weaved than the other cottons, so it ended up being not the ideal fabric for the diamonds, but I made it work as much as possible. And then this is just the back piece of the cape. Fairly large piece. And then all of the pieces had to be cut out of the lining fabric as well. So the back, the collar, and also the two front pieces. Same as the front with the armhole placement as well. And funny story, I actually had to redo a couple of my pieces in the red lining fabric because I forgot to include a seam allowance, and I ended up not having enough fabric to cut it out, so I had to reorder it, and it actually ended up being a slightly different color because they were from different dye lots. But luckily it's just the lining fabric, and no one would ever know except for me telling her right now. I always order extra fabric just in case, but I didn't order enough to cut out two major large pieces, so oh well. And then the instructions said to apply some interfacing to the front pieces near the middle opening of the cape. I went ahead and sewed the front pieces together, leaving space in between them to leave room for the arms to go through. I had to re-sew this a couple times because it was kind of pulling on the top and bottom of the seam. Then, of course, I ironed my seam flat. I did some practice with finishing seam techniques in this project, so I did end up encasing these seams with a bias binding just for practice, even though I really didn't need it because I end up aligning everything anyway. So I made this little diamond. I think it was 4 inches wide by 7 inches tall, and I traced out many of them. I don't remember how many, maybe 19 or 20, onto my grayish silvery fabric. And then I cut them all out. Tried to pay good attention to the grain line so that it matched up with the grain line of my front pieces as well. And then, to prevent any more fraying from happening with this fabric, I applied interfacing to all the pieces, and before putting them on the top, I gave it really good ironing so it was nice and flat. And then here's me applying that interfacing to each of those little diamond pieces, just to keep it from fraying as much as possible. I used a little tape, I think it's a wash away tape, to position them down so that they wouldn't move. And I did overlap them very, very, very slightly. Maybe by a couple millimeters on each side. And for this one that goes over the armhole, I just sort of cut it right in the center there. And it ended up not, you can't really tell. It sort of hides the armhole a little bit. Then I went through with that invisible thread and I top stitched them all down with a zigzag stitch as close as possible to the edge as I could. I thought this thread would be difficult to work with, but it was actually pretty easy, and it really stitched down beautifully. Definitely was one of the more time-consuming parts of the project because I had to go around each one with the top stitching, but it's definitely worth it because it turned out really nice, and it was fun to finally be able to use that top stitch thread, since I had it for a different project that I haven't gotten to yet. And then that's sort of how it turned out. Finally, everything's stitched down. Then I stitch the back pieces together in the center. Then I measured out golden trim pieces and cut them out. This part didn't turn out as perfectly as I would like. I definitely didn't measure these properly to get the right length, but it's not very noticeable now once the project's finished. I wasn't entirely sure how to stitch these on properly so that they would look even all the way across and all of the seams would match up. I think I just needed to be a little bit more careful because the seams don't match up on the finished piece on the back, but oh well. I did roll over the edge and stitch it down, each golden piece. And then I pin them to the bottom as well as the center front. I actually realized after the fact that I didn't have to put them on the bottom because that's not in the pictures, but I really like how it looked on the bottom. I think it sort of ties it all together. So I was alright with it. And then I stitched it all the way around the bottom and the center front. I didn't bother with the raw edges because I knew those would be encased in the lining. So I just assembled my collar, and I also stitched the gold around the collar on the lining as well as the pink fabric. And then this is me just top stitching the edge around. And now just pinning the collar to the top of the cape. I guess right sides facing each other. I used a couple layers of pins just to make sure that it would stay where it needs to stay. And then I just basted the collar to the cape because the final stitching around the collar comes when you apply the lining. So just being very careful not to get any puckers or gathers that I do not want. And then this is how it looks before I put on the lining. I was very happy with how it looked right here. It laid really, really well in the dress form. And the color looked nice. I was very happy. And then I had to stitch the lining pieces together the same as what I did for the regular front facing pieces. Back seam, armhole seam, and so on and so forth. Basically assemble the full lining before you apply it onto the front pieces. And then sewed the lining to the front pieces. And I hung it on my dress form, and it desperately, desperately needed a pressing. So went out with my iron and made sure everything was pressed nicely. I was a bit worried that I would have to top stitch around the edges, but after the pressing, everything seemed to lay well. The lining wasn't hanging farther down, so I was really glad for that. I did make sure to hang it on my dress form after pinning it to see if any pieces need to be repinned or trimmed, and everything seemed to be okay, so it really just needed a nice ironing flat all around the edges. I like to use a large surface like this instead of just an ironing board. For big pieces like this, it's a lot easier to just spread them out and get them ironed. And then I just hand stitch the hook and eye for the top to keep it all closed together. I had these silver hooks and eyes, so I decided to just use them. Would have been nice to have a red hook and eye, but this silver looks nice as well. And you really don't see it, so it worked. And then the last finishing touch I wanted to do was sew around the armhole so that the lining wasn't being pulled out when I put my arm through. So I ended up just using the invisible top stitch thread for that. Just did single row of stitches, I think zigzag, around the armhole to sew the lining to the front pieces. And that was my last step before I could officially wear it. And that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this type of video. I always found sewing videos to be really relaxing, so thanks for watching.